So, 50 days of kindness. We're continuing to talk together a bit about that. Is that for me? Tell them I'm busy. And for the 50 days between Pentecost and our upcoming 50th anniversary in July, we've been focusing on some of the many, many ways that we can show kindness and compassion. And today I want to first address a question that was posed to the church this past week. I guess it wasn't so much a question as a comment. We get a lot of those. And it was this: if we're to follow Christ, kindness is supposed to be our way of life. It is not to count your acts like I've done my 50 or 100 and I'm good. No, no, no. If you want to be a human being, kindness is your way of life, full stop. And I have to say, I agree with that statement. In theory, that is how we're supposed to be living our lives. And in theory, our actions are always supposed to be rooted in kindness and compassion. But theories can sometimes be kind of abstract. And there's a corny old joke about a grumpy old man who always bragged to his neighbors about how much he loved children. And one day, as he was pouring a new sidewalk in front of his house, a boy from down the block accidentally rode his bicycle through the wet cement. And the neighbors were then shocked to hear the grumpy old man shouting profanities at the kid. "I thought you loved children," they said. "I do," he replied. "I love them in the abstract, not in the concrete." I'm here all week, try the veal. So what we're trying to uplift during these 50 days for 50 acts of kindness is kindness in the concrete. Actual concrete examples of ways in which we can show kindness and compassion to others. And by the way, to the person who sent that comment, I'm not going to name you, but feel free also to send us your suggestions of acts of kindness. And actually, I want to extend that invitation to all of you to send your suggestions, and we may publish them in the query or on social media, and you can send them in to communications@mcctoronto.com, or you can write them on the whiteboard that'll be in the social hall after the service. And today, I want to talk about some concrete ways in which we can show some kindness to the earth. And actually, I suspect less concrete would be one way, but I digress. But first of all, why would we want to do this? I mean, there are some really practical reasons to be kind to the earth, the long-term survival of humans on this planet being foremost among them, I suspect. And actually, I'm thinking we don't really need a practical reason beyond that. That's sufficient. But what are some of the spiritual reasons? How does kindness to the earth benefit us and the earth spiritually? And I know for many of us, we find great peace and serenity in nature. And from my earliest childhood, I was enraptured by the redwood forests of my home in California. And there is something just so incredibly, divinely mystical about the sights and sounds and smells and feel of a redwood forest. It's a delight for all the senses. And I want to affirm that the spiritual is the sensual. To quote one of my favorite spiritual writers, Native American elder and Episcopal Bishop Stephen Charleston, the spiritual is the sensual. When some of our friends present religious life as a dry, pinched legal code to be followed with grim determination, we need to remind them that spiritual life was made to fill the senses. And we can breathe in the holy, drawing it around us like wreaths of incense, and we can taste it, touch it, hear it sing 1,000 different songs that echo the praise of God. And the maker of all things did not create us to dwell in a sterile vacuum, but shaped our life in a rich dance of color and texture and sound. And spirituality is how we inhabit the abundant life the life God desires for us, a life made for us to delight in with every part of our being. And I so agree with that. The spiritual is the sensual. And for me, a redwood forest is one of the most spiritual and sensual places on earth. The way the trees reach up to the sky and the light filters greenly through the canopy, which is literally hundreds of meters above me. Just by comparison, if the tallest redwood tree were planted in downtown Toronto, it would be taller than every structure but the CN Tower. Yeah, they're amazing. And being among hundreds of them is like being in a freaking cathedral. To me, they're sacred, and for me, that's heaven on earth. And I don't mean to go on about it, but ask yourself, where in the world gives you that sense of peace, that sense of connection to the earth and to the divine, that sense of being and belonging in a relationship with God and with God's creation? We are in a relationship with God and God's creation, and relationships always require some work. Can I get an amen from all the people in some kind of relationship? Every relationship, with a spouse, with a friend, with a coworker, every relationship requires some nurturing. And kindness isn't just an act that we extend to other fellow humans on this planet, but a behavior that we can extend towards Mother Nature as well. And there are a gazillion ways. Plant a tree. If you can't plant a tree, water a tree. Recycle mindfully. Take some time to educate yourself on what's recyclable and what's not. Pick up some litter. Join a community cleanup. Feed the birds. Feed the squirrels, which is what's going to happen when you try to feed the birds, so you might as well get used to it. Grow herbs. Come to the workshop after worship today on drought-tolerant plants that are easier on the earth. And you will note that the reading from Genesis that Alan read was about the third day of creation when all the plants were created. So embrace them. Embrace the outdoors. Spend some time getting to know the nature around you. We are so blessed in Toronto to have a good bit of green space near everyone. Shop at a farmer's market. Figure out ways in which you can influence policies that protect the environment. Write a letter supporting the protection of Ontario's green belt. Save water. Now, that last one may sound like a really minor thing, and it's really easy for Canadians to assume that we have an almost endless supply of clean, fresh water, because after all, we are often told that Canada has some 20% of the world's total freshwater resources. And I'm guessing most of you all knew that, right? Smile and nod at me. What is less well known, however, is that less than half of that water, about 7% of the global supply, is renewable. Most of the water in Canada is what is called fossil water, water that's retained in lakes and underground aquifers and glaciers. And now for Canada's 33-odd million people, about 0.5% of the world's population, this is still what my grandmother would call a gracious plenty. But actually, I learned another thing, a little factoid this week, that more than half of that water drains northward into the Arctic Ocean and Hudson Bay, and as a result, it is unavailable to 85% of the Canadian population who live along the country's southern border. And that means that the remaining supply, while still abundant, is heavily used and often overly stressed. And these are dry, boring facts. But what does it mean to bring healing and redemption to the earth? And how is our worship of the Creator linked with how we treat God's creation? As the choir sang a few minutes ago, with how we treat the garden to nurture and protect. The earth is a garden to nurture and protect. And as people of faith, one of the things we hope for is to be able to participate with God in the redemption of the world, to become active players, active participants in creation, not just bystanders with no stake in the outcome, because I'm telling you, we do have a stake in the outcome. As I mentioned, the long-term survival of humans on this planet. And when we look around, do we see the world we want to see? Do we see a place where love of God and love of neighbor are lived out? Do we see those acts of kindness? Do we see the reign of God in our midst and all around us? Well, we don't always. Those are things we hope for. Those are things we don't always see yet, but which we can be certain are part of God's plan, God's dream for us and for the earth. And we can be just as certain, I think, that it's also God's plan for us to participate in bringing those things about. God does not call us to sit on our butts in a pew. And that passage I read from Revelation about the new heaven and the new earth, we are responsible for bringing that about in partnership with God. It is not just up to God, it is also up to us. And the Bible, from beginning to end, from Genesis to Revelation, right, the readings I chose today were specifically the beginning and the end. And everywhere in between, it describes a God who cares deeply and passionately about the earth and calls for all of God's human earth creatures to be earth keepers, to care for and nurture God's creation. And if caring for God's creation is an integral part of what it means to be a person of faith, then what can and what should we do? How do we put into practice our commitment to care for the earth? How can we bring our spirituality down to the earth to be grounded in the world around us? Biblical wisdom is both the skills to live with the earth as a gift of God and the values to treasure the earth as a gift from God. And I think God says to us, don't tell me what you believe, show me what you do. So an abusive or indifferent relationship to creation sends confused signals if we want to proclaim a loving creator. And underneath it all is a vibrant witness that recognizes the relevance of the good news of God's unconditional love for everything that God has made. The theologian Sally McFaig wrote that we are, all of us, being called to do something unprecedented. We are being called to think about everything that is, for we now know that everything is interrelated and that the well-being of each is connected to the well-being of the whole. And this suggests a planetary agenda for all the religions and all the various fields of expertise. And I would say it also suggests a calling for us to care for and nurture the earth. Amen.
God is in this place. I can feel